Welcome to the AP Now podcast, the podcast that covers trends, insights, and emerging issues impacting every accounts payable function. Your host, Mary Schaeffer, is the founder of AP Now, a B2B digital information and learning company focused on all issues related to AP. Stay tuned as Mary and her guests discuss the business intelligence you need to ensure a cost-effective, technologically efficient, fraud-resistant, regulatory compliant accounts payable function. Without further ado, let's dive right in.
Hello. Thanks for joining me today for another episode of the AP Now podcast. I've labeled this session Back to Basics, and it's one that we intend to do on a sporadic basis addressing different issues, but basics may not be the best way to describe it, but anyway, it's the term I came up with. And so what we're going to answer today is the most frequently asked question about the accounts payable function as according to Google. So in other words, what is the term that is related to accounts payable that is most frequently Googled? Now, if you're sitting around thinking about this, like me, you're probably coming up with all sorts of esoteric questions and issues, etc. But the reality is, when you look at the data, the most common accounts payable search term on Google is simply, what is accounts payable? So we're going to attempt to answer it. And as you might suspect, I'm going to answer it a little differently than maybe some other people would. So I like to say, when we talk about the term accounts payable, it can mean one of two different things. It can either be an accounting term, and that's what many people are searching for, the accounting or the financial term, or it can refer to the department within virtually every organization that handles invoices and lots more. Okay, so let's dive in and let's take a look at this now. Let's see what we're talking about. So we're going to start off by addressing the accounting term because that's fairly straightforward and we can, get it done. I don't want to act like it's not one of the things that it's not the information that people is looking for, because absolutely they are. So when people talk about accounts payable from a financial standpoint, either for financial statements, balance sheet, income statement, etc., typically what they're looking for or what they're discussing is the amount of money that a company owes to its creditors, its suppliers, its bills payable, if you will. And generally, we're talking about only those liabilities that have a short-term basis, and that is typically meant to be within 1 year. So, long-term loans, for example, 30-year loans, they would not be included, the debt repayment, the principal. So basically short-term liabilities as they appear on your financial statement. But of course, the issue that I like to talk about, and I spend a lot of time talking about, is the accounts payable function. And this is a function that basically every single organization has, and it's the group of people or the person, sometimes it's just a person or maybe a half a person, they do this function and something else at a smaller company, is the group that pays the bills. Now that seems like pretty straightforward, but it gets a lot more complicated than that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Not only that, the accounts payable groups in most organizations does a lot more than just pay the bills, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So accounts payable, paying the bills, a lot harder than it sounds and a lot more complicated. There's many things that can go wrong, many things that often do go wrong. You don't get the bill arrives late, the bill or the invoice doesn't match what you put on your purchase order, you get several copies of the invoice, you get fraudulent invoices, the list goes on. And it's for this reason that many organizations understand that it's important to have very highly skilled professionals working in their accounts payable function, and they do. Okay? So the basics, getting the bills paid, basically just about every accounts payable group does that. And then after that, there are a myriad of tasks that are handled in accounts payable groups, but not always. So what company A does might be different than company B does, and different than what company C does. Some accounts payable groups will do all of the things I'm about to talk about. Some of them will only do one or two. So what are all these other tasks that I've been alluding to? So let's get started. Let's dive right in. I have listed 9 that I'm going to talk about, but there can be a lot more than this. But these are the more common ones, shall we say. So the first number 1 responsibility that we see in many accounts payable departments, actually it should be in all, is fraud protection. Your accounts payable staff should be educated and should keep on top of all the different new frauds that are out there and how to protect the organization against it. And the accounts payable staff should also be alerting the rest of the company about these new frauds. And it pains me to tell you this, but there continue to be new frauds, and crooks, unfortunately, continue to look for new ways to defraud companies, take advantage of their largesse, if you will, and continually come up with new frauds. And many of them, by the way, are focused directly on your accounts payable team. The next issue that all good accounts payable departments have to address is the issue of best practices. They have to not only utilize them, but they have to understand that they change and be able to identify new best practices that will enhance their organization or keep their organization, just at a reasonable level. Because if you don't use best practices, which always incorporate internal controls, strong internal controls, you could fall prey to fraud and other inefficiencies. And what we're seeing as we go through this now, and I'll have a little bit more about this towards the end of the talk, is that obviously best practices are changing, and what we've gone through in the last few months with COVID is requiring us to take a new look at our best practices and change some of them. The next issue that probably every accounts payable department who has to handle it, which is they didn't have to handle, is the issue of 1099s. Data from AP Now shows that about 76% of all organizations have their 1099s issued. That work is handled by the accounts payable staff. Okay, and as you may know, those rules change every year. And as we go into 2021, we're going to have a lot of changes because the IRS has come up with a new 1099 reporting form, the 1099 MISC. Some of the information will still be reported on the 1099 MISC, but payments made to independent contractors, or what's called non-employee compensation in IRS speak, will now be handled on a new form, the 1099 NEC. So that is going to be a huge change, a lot of work, and as I said, 76% of all accounts payable departments handle the 1099s for their organization. And that means, by the way, not only issuing the 1099s, but frequently dealing with the B notices if the IRS determines that those 1099s that were issued were not issued correctly. Next issue that we see handled with in accounts payable, and I expect to see this in either greater numbers in the coming months, is the evaluation of new technology for technology related to accounts payable. So it can be things like, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, etc. But it can also be hardware considerations, as we learned painfully in the last 2 or 3 months. Typically, the accounts payable department has a manager. Sometimes the controller assumes that role, but oftentimes, frequently, you do have a separate individual whose responsibility is to manage the staff and make sure all this work gets done. And so that takes another set of skills, management skills, what we sometimes refer to as soft skills. So that person needs to have those skills as well. And as you can see, as I'm going through this list, and I'm only halfway through it, by the way, there are a number of different skills that the person who manages this group has to have. And so it is not definitely a low-level job. Next issue we see, many accounts payable departments will handle the reporting and the remitting of both sales tax and use tax, if applicable, for their organization. Likewise, they will handle the unclaimed property or the escheat reporting and remitting And sometimes that can be to, all the states. This is one area where all the states have unclaimed property rules and laws. Next, what we expect from our accounts payable managers is that they make recommendations regarding more efficient, more productive processes. We're going to have a lot of these, as I mentioned, some new best practices, some greater use of technology. And as we come out of this horrible COVID crisis and we move on, we strongly suspect that we're going to see a number of accounts payable teams working remotely, either part of the time or all the time. So there are going to be all sorts of new processes and recommendations that are going to have to go along with that. And lastly, but not least, many accounts payable departments handle the expense reimbursement requests for your travelers. This is it's another one of those trying tasks, kind of like the 1099 reporting. Everybody wishes they didn't have to do it, but it has to be done, and it oftentimes ends up in accounts payable. And going along with this, as we come out of this, while you may be saying, well, we probably didn't have much travel and entertainment expenses in the last few months, for many organizations that will be true, but what you did have in droves are refunds for conferences and seminars that either did not take place or were pushed out. And so you're going to have your accounts payable team doing the tracking for that, making sure that you got all those refunds, and that will be a huge issue, as will handling reimbursement requests for some unique working from home expenses. So yes, maybe not so much expense reports, but we're going to have these other expenditures. So lots of work there. I've just kind of hit on the highlights of what tends to be addressed in accounts payable departments, but by no stretch of the imagination is this a comprehensive list. It's just, highlights. And so you can expect more of this type of work from your team going forward. Now, I alluded to the fact that, or I hope I alluded to the fact that there are going to be some changes in best practices as we return to work, and this will give us a huge opportunity for process improvements. And as this relates to the accounts payable function, we're going to see, I believe, the almost complete elimination of paper invoices. Now, by this, I don't mean necessarily that everybody is going to adopt invoice automation, although I strongly suggest that this might be a good time to at least evaluate what's out there. It may simply mean converting all your vendors to sending their invoices through email so that we don't have problems should another crisis like the one we just went through occur. Many companies found that the invoices were in the office being mailed into the office, and the staff was at home, where if they'd been emailed, they would have been able to get them a lot easier. It would not have been such a hassle. Next issue, we expect to see an increase in the number of electronic payments. Companies realized as we went into lockdown that paper checks were problematic. Let's just leave it at that. And also, we expect to see more remote working, maybe not full time, but staff working from home 1, 2, or 3 days a week, and in some cases, perhaps full time, as companies begin to fully comprehend the real estate savings they can make if they have less real estate. So we see some big changes coming. This will mean new best practices, revised processes. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but it's also going to be a lot of work. Let me not underestimate that. And I think what the accounts payable staffs have shown is that, yes, we got struck by lightning, if you will, and many of them were able to, on 48 hours notice or some similar short period of time, they were able to take the accounts payable function remotely and keep the company up and operating. And keep in mind that it's possible that this could happen again. Now, in a few cases, because the organization was so paper intensive, they were not able to take the function home. They were not able to start working remotely, and thus the accounts payable staff was deemed to be essential and came into the office. We were able to do that this time. Next time, who knows what next time is going to be? I certainly don't. We may not be so lucky. So I've addressed some of these issues that I've been talking about in the end in a new book I have out, and I call it an Accounts Payable Back to Work Action Plan, and it takes into account what's gone on for the last few months. I've done a number of online meetings and talks in the last 2 months with an AP association out of the UK, and people have been very generous in sharing their thoughts and telling us what they're doing. So anyway, from this new best practices, the book, An Accounts Payable Back to Work Action Plan. So if you are thinking that you might be wanting to change things, I hope that would help you a little bit. Well, that's all for today's chat. I know that the podcast that we have planned for next week is going to be really exciting. I hope you'll watch for it. It should be out just like this one, I believe, on late Wednesday night, Thursday morning, depending upon where you are. If you like this episode, I hope you'll give us a thumbs up, leave a positive review, or subscribe. You can also sign up for the AP Now e-zine, the free e-zine. Just go to www.ap-now.com. There's a box on the left of the homepage where you can sign up, and we'll alert you when we have new episodes. Until next time, thank you for taking the time to spend with me, listening to me, and I urge you all to be safe.